The average age of a child entering foster care is 7 to 8 years old. 10% of foster care children spend more than 5 years in the foster care system. 52% are adopted by a foster parent. I chose to share these facts because they were my reality until I was 13 years old. As a former foster youth, I am actively interested in foster care and have plans to adopt a child in the near future. This is something I am involved in and I care deeply about. Jennifer S. Jones, author of Navigating Our Adoption Journey, defined foster care as a system designed to provide a temporary living arrangement for children whose biological parents are unable to care for them, close quote. Today I will tell you about the origin of foster care in the United States and how it has progressed through the years. I will begin by sharing the early foster care history in the United States and what brought about the changes to the original child placement system. I will then discuss the changes in foster care through time, beginning with early orphanages in the 1800s, progressing to foster parents and social agencies in the 1900s, and finishing with the current system in place today. Okay, let's start by focusing on the origin of foster care. What system did our country have in place before the current one was set up? In 1562, English poor law was adopted in the States, and children were placed into homes as indentured servants until adulthood. The first instance of this form of foster servitude can be traced to a 7-year-old boy named Benjamin Eaton, who lived in the nation's first colony of Jamestown. It is important to note that these placements were made because the parents or guardians of these children were deceased. They were not due to child abuse, since that was socially accepted and legal. English poor law kept children out of almshouses, also known as poorhouses, where they would not learn a trade and were exposed to unsavory adults and horrendous surroundings. English poor law, however, permitted exploitation and child abuse. The regulation of children, especially those without parents, seems non-existent in early America. At that point in our nation's history, it was clear that more guidelines and laws were needed to ensure better protection and care of children. An improvement in quality of care and placement isn't seen until the 1800s, and not until after the exposure of truly terrible circumstances. In 1807, Mary Ellen Wilson, an orphan, received daily whippings and beatings at her foster home. Since there was no legal protection in place for abused children, the attorneys for the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals took on her case. Her attorneys argued that laws protecting animals from abuse should not be greater than laws protecting children. Mary's foster mom was convicted of assault and battery and given a 1-year sentence. In 1853, a minister named Charles Loring Brace founded the Children's Aid Society in New York City. Due to the large amount of immigrant children sleeping in the streets of New York, he started the orphan train movement, which sent orphan children by train to live in farms across the country and in Canada. From 1854 to 1929, it is estimated that over 250,000 orphaned, abandoned, and homeless children were placed in homes throughout the United States and Canada. Families receiving these children were not screened, and little to no post-placement follow-up ever occurred. Some children were treated as family with love and respect, while others were abused and treated as slaves. Despite the lack of protection, Brace's system provided a way to house and care for these children, and it became the foundation for the foster care system we have in place today. Due to the New York Children's Aid Society's placements, secretarian social agencies and state governments became involved in foster home placements. Many other changes occurred during the late 1800s which benefited youth in foster care. In 1865, Massachusetts began paying board to families who took care of children too young to be indentured. In 1885, Pennsylvania passed the first licensing law, requiring all placement families to be licensed by the state. Pennsylvania also passed a law which made it a misdemeanor to care for 2 or more unrelated children without a license. In 1893, South Dakota began providing subsidies to the Children's Home Society for its public child care work. The laws passed in the late 1800s paved the path for many laws passed in the 1900s that increased the quality of life for the foster care that were dependent on these people. Much progress had been made throughout the centuries, but some old practices were still in place, mostly due to tradition and just lack of awareness. By the 1900s, America's state and federal courts had validated the authority of the state to step in and remove children from their homes in response to abuse or neglect. In the early 1900s, Henry Chapin, a New York pediatrician and founder of the Speedwell Society, circulated statistics showing orphanages literally sickened and killed alarming numbers of children. In 1910, there were still well over 1,000 orphanages in the United States, and their average size had grown considerably since the late 19th century. Around this time, the first social work school in the country, the New York School of Applied Philanthropy, opened its doors. In 1912, the U.S. Children's Bureau, the first department of the federal government devoted to the welfare of children, was created as the key federal entity in overseeing the administration of federal child welfare funds and issuing policies. The country had awakened to the need for permanent change from orphanages. It also began to accept the reality that family preservation is not always possible and should not come before the needs of the children. Foster care as our country's answer to the unplaced or ill-placed children was finally becoming more accepted, but changes on a national level were necessary for the preservation and legitimacy of the program. In 1935, the Social Security Act was passed, which authorized the first federal grants for child welfare services with the stipulation that state inspections of all foster family homes must take place prior to placement. The Adoption Assistance and Child Welfare Act of 1980 established federal procedural guidelines for children entering foster care and required courts to regularly review child welfare cases. Since its initiation, the federal child welfare law has been amended with the goal of system improvement. Some notable changes are increased support of kinship care and resources for older youth in foster care. In 1997, the Adoption and Same Families Act was passed, which put less emphasis on reuniting biological families and more focus on putting the child's health and safety needs first. The changes made in the 1900s shaped the foster care system into what we see today. Now, foster care is well defined and has more support, regulation, and awareness than ever before. In the United States today, there are roughly 429,000 children in foster care. These children can be placed in several different types of foster homes. The single foster family is one or more parents who cares for up to 6 children in foster home with their own biological or adopted children. Group homes are homes where a small number of unrelated people in need of care, support, or supervision can live together. They are much better regulated and monitored than they were in the past. Kinship care is when foster children are placed in the home of a relative or a person who they knew before they were taken from their parents. The kinship foster care provider receives the emotional and financial support that a foster parent would receive from a foster care agency, but already has an established relationship with the child. Today, many organizations exist to voice the rights and needs of these dependent children, including court-appointed special advocates, Together We Rise, One Simple Wish, and Foster Care to Success. These organizations and thousands like them advocate, mentor, teach, encourage, and lobby for youth in the foster care system and their caretakers. Over the centuries, foster care in the United States has changed tremendously. Understanding foster care's background and history provides important context. The training, courses, home inspections, and other requirements of prospective foster parents are in place for a reason and aid in the protection of foster children. Many resources are now available which contribute to the mental, physical, and emotional health of the children. The progress in foster care is made possible by the hard work of caring individuals throughout our nation's history. Progress in this field is really slow because it takes 18 years to figure out what choices you made have affected the children in what way. The foster care system in place today is not perfect, but it's continually changing and trying to improve. Alexander Den Heiger said, "When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower," close quote. Foster care has its roots in darkness, but out of that darkness comes hope. We need to know the history of foster care and stay informed about the direction that it's headed in. What we do, say, and support becomes the reality of the future of children in foster care.